Well, folks, I will now hand it over to Jim Keeler.
Hi, guys. Here I am in Hurricane, Utah. Lived all over the United States. Never figured up I'd end up in the southern Utah desert, 30 minutes from Zion National Park, but here I am. But just kind of get back a little history. Starting when I was about 4.5, 5 years old, I started playing with what were then die-cast cars made in the 30s. So I actually ended up melting a good part of my brother's collection of cars from the 30s because I saw my dad take our car to get it painted in a heated room, and so I figured I'd paintbrush the model cars and put them in a can in the yard and set a fire when I was 5 years old. So I ended up with some really interesting metal blobs with funny round blackish shapes on them. And from there, my interest in cars and models took off. And later on, when the Ace models came out after the war, I was building balsa wood airplanes, and then I saw this Ace model of a 49 Ford kit. So I picked it up at the hobby shop, took it home, opened the box, and the instructions basically said, remove everything that doesn't look like a 49 Ford. So somewhere in my divested first collection, that unbuilt model still resides in somewhere, someplace. And then when the first plastic kit started to come out, my uncle bought me a Constellation kit made by, I believe, Lindbergh at the time. And I glued it together with Duco cement, which lasted 2 days. And that was the end of that. And then Revell started to come out with the all of the beautiful 32nd scale classic cars that were designed by a guy from England and for Gowland and Gowland. And so I started building those, and I still have actually the remains of my very first model. Let me see if I can make it over here and pick it up and show it to you. This was the 1910 Cadillac. And when I returned from New York in 1975, I found this in the basement of my mother's house, buried when I remodeled her house. So I still have it. But it's notable because when I built it, I knew that the cars, because I saw them in my neighborhood, didn't have shiny roofs. So I got some Kleenex and some model airplane dope and put a canvas roof on it. So it's still there. But I built those, quite a few of them. And then I started buying the AMT promos quite early. And many of them ended up as product development pictures using M80 firecrackers, cherry bombs, etc. You know, it's so, I won't tell you how many thousands of dollars worth of those things I destroyed. Had a great time doing it. And as soon as the first plastic model car kits, the true ones from AMT came out, I started buying them at the very beginning and started building. And before that, I got involved with building all of the Revell model kits. Everything that they manufactured, I bought and built. And my father was always screaming and yelling at me, Jim, I don't know why you're wasting your money on this. It'll never amount to anything. So I built every plane, ship, whatever stuff that they built, that they had, most of the kits, and had been in my bedroom. And even the aircraft carriers, which were World War II carriers, I customized those with canted decks and added the canted deck to them, painted them and everything else. So I got into customizing ships as well as cars. So anyway, so I played around with the 32nd scale Revell stuff, and then they did the Futura kit and the Lincoln Continental and blah, blah, blah. Loved them all. One of the things I did with the Continental, the Mark II, was I found out that Ford Motor Company had made one of them into a flip-top car, which eventually ended up as the chassis for the real Futura and then the Batmobile. And so I did a model of that with the flip-top roof, and it had brown, real leather, brown upholstery in it, that kind of thing. And then pretty soon the stores had started having contests. So 1950s, 57, 58, while I was in high school, my parents were divorced, and I lived in San Diego with my father, and I had to visit my mother for 3 months in the summer. So I built a model and entered it in Douglas Models contest in Salt Lake City and won first place with it. I still have the beautiful solid brass trophy from that.
Which car was that? Which car was that?
That would have been it was, I believe, I can't remember for sure. I believe it was the Revell Ranchero that I customized. I put a working radio in it, working headlights.
What year is this about?
57.
So this is not like today where you can get all these micro electronics. This is a pretty big deal back then.
Yeah, nobody had ever seen anything quite like that. You could hear the radio playing in the car. Anyway, I won first place with that. All the contests I entered, that I ever entered, I won first place in.
In fact, some of your models are in the Model Car Hall of Fame.
Yeah, they're in the National Model Car Museum in Salt Lake City. Yeah, National Model Car Builders Museum, as they call it. So all my good stuff is there. So anyway, so as this went on, I saw these contests going on, and I thought, well, it'd be fun if during October, when they had the big car show in San Diego, if we had a model car contest. So I approached the people who ran the show, and they agreed to it, and we're going to get glass cases and supply trophies. And then I went around to every hobby shop in San Diego, which at the time was a lot of hobby shops. And I got all of them to use my set of contest rules, and every store had a contest.
Now, how old were you when you did all this? About how old were you?
I was 15, 16.
So you were just, getting around on a bicycle to do all this.
Well, that's what I was doing, was on a bike. Exactly right. And so anyway, we had all these contests, and then the winners from each hobby shop, the 3 big winners, all went to the big car show in Balboa Park in San Diego. And that was a big deal. And George Barris was there, and Ed Roth was there. I met Ed when I was 15. I met George when I was 15. Became friends with both of them, especially good friends with Ed. And that lasted until he died in 2001.
Can you tell us a little bit about Ed?
Ed was 2 men. Okay. He had his public persona that everybody knew about. That was Ed Roth. But behind that, there was this really, really incredible, dedicated person who could become your best friend. And so Ed and I had a lot of conversations, and this went on the rest of both of our lives. Eventually, right after I got married, we went to LA on a trip, my wife and I, to the National Hobby Show in Anaheim, 1983, I guess it was. Yeah, 83. And so I called Ed while I was there. He was over at Knott's Berry Farm, and he said that he had joined my church. I'm going, Ed Roth joined a church? And he says, no, not any church. He says, your church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Mormon church. Uh-huh. And I started laughing. He says, what's a good joke? I said, now what else are you doing now? And he says, no, I'm serious. I really am. And blah, blah, blah. So anyway, so
not exactly the public persona when people think of, no, Big Daddy and.
But one of the things he did then was, Mormons don't drink beer. So he went through all of his T-shirts and drawings and everything and changed all the beer cans to ice cream cones.
Wow.
Not a lot of people. Not a lot of people know that. No, he was committed, totally committed. He was quite an amazing man. And George was coming to those car shows down in San Diego. And so he was taking photographs and putting out little pocket books on model cars. And several of those early issues, probably 20% of the cars in there were models that had appeared in my contests in San Diego, because I did the big car show thing for several years after I started it.
So until you were getting a bit of, even as a teenager, you were already getting a bit of a reputation in the kit model car world. I mean, you were.
Yeah, I was. Yeah.
So
yeah.
this,
and so
I guess, yeah, okay.
So then he took all this stuff up to Peterson Publishing, and Peterson published it. And so that was interesting. And so anyway, part of the deal with the contests was that I wanted to, and was my foot into the industry, is I sent a letter to AMT and Monogram asking if they could provide any model kits for free that I could give away at the model shows. And AMT responded, Monogram did not. And Revell was just 150 miles up the coast in LA, right close to the airport. And my father was in the airline business, and so I could fly when I wanted to. So I thought, well, I'll contact Revell directly. So I called him on the phone, got a hold of their PR guy, Henry Blankford, and made an appointment with him. And I flew up to the LA airport, took a cab to Revell, just a few miles up the road from the airport, and met with Henry. And I did this for about a year and a half or so before they hired me. And so I go to see Henry, and he would hand me a whole bunch of models and say, build this. You're so smart. He says, whatever. And at the time they were doing the Revell Chrysler Corporation cars in 87th scale, as well as 25th scale. So he gave me a whole box of these 87th scale models. And he says, okay, go ahead, customize these, So I picked out a Plymouth station wagon, and I opened the back deck, opened the hood, built an engine, put it in 87th scale, opened the door, chopped the top, painted it with a pearlescent paint job. And my next flight to LA, I could fly for $1 just to LA from San Diego whenever I wanted. And I did a lot. And so anyway, I took it up there and handed it to him, and it was on his desk till I left. It was still there when I left the company. So Henry and I became really good friends, and we really got along. And he was also a Hollywood personality. He knew all these people in Hollywood. And so he would get tickets to these TV shows and get me front row seats, during the productions. I got to see a lot of stuff that way. That was a lot of fun. So anyway, then
you mean like game shows or
game shows and that kind of game shows.
You remember off the top of your head? You remember any of the anything
I don't
we
remember
recognize?
the names, but at the time they were all the big names, And so I got to go to those regularly, and so at that same time, while I'm seeing Revell, I realized that Peterson Publishing was up in Hollywood. So I didn't have a bike and I didn't have a car. So I took a taxi cab to the nearest hotel, back to the airport. And then I went to these, to the desks of the hotels where they had buses that would take you to their hotels in Hollywood. So I found the one closest to Peterson and jumped on their bus and went to Hollywood and walked from there over to Peterson Publishing, went in the door and asked if I could talk to the people at Rod and Custom. So went upstairs and was talking to the editor then, and Spence Murray. And so he asked me if I'd like to write a column for Rod and Custom when I was 18.
Wow.
So
we're still in what, the late 50s here?
Yeah. Uh-huh. Oh yeah.
So this is before the rise of people like Tom Daniel. This is kind of before their time.
Yeah, this was kind of before Tom Daniel's time, and I was an early bird on the scene. Mm-hmm. So I started writing for Rod and Custom, and then he left, and he was replaced by whose name I cannot remember at the time, who had come from New York to Los Angeles to work for Peterson to be the new editor. And at the same time, Carcraft was doing stuff and blah, blah, blah. So I did stuff for them as well. I didn't use my name on it because I was a Rod and Custom personality. So they provided me with all these hundreds of letters they got, and I answered all the questions and blah, 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 So that was another thing going on. So then on one of the trips to LA, I took up 2 or 3 of the models that I had been working on. One was a 40 Ford sedan that I called it the Cut Up, and it was really an early version of a funny car with the front engine, and the driver sat in the back in front of the rear axle, and was painted candy apple red. Nobody else had figured out how to do that at the time, but I was the only one doing candy apple red paint jobs. So, and that's a whole other story. But anyway, so I I take this stuff up to Henry Blankford, and on this one trip, I had 2 or 3 of these models with me. And at the end of the meeting that we had, and my meetings with him, they sometimes would last an hour. I mean, this wasn't a 5-minute in and out deal. We became friends. He said, someone here I'd like you to meet. And so, and this was, I was still 18 years old. And he took me downstairs to Royal Glazer's office, who was the vice president of Revell, and took me in the office and introduced me and said, have fun. And he left. And I'm like totally terrified. Okay. I mean, you know, and so
here's the king and queen of plastic models, you know, and
yeah,
you're sitting here before the throne.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there before the throne, and this woman was gorgeously dressed. She could have gone on the pages of Vogue any day of the week, because she had the money and she dressed that way. Her office was decorated the same way, very, very contemporary for the times. It was like it was in a totally different part of the factory. It was so different inside there. So she looked at all my models and was handling them and moving them around and everything and talking to me and asking me a lot of questions. And after about 20 minutes, she sat back, way back in her chair, and then she leaned forward over the table, and in a voice that I would only describe as what I know today as some woman asking you to go to bed with her, she said, would you like to come and work for Revell? With that look on her face as well. And meanwhile, under the desk, my legs were shaking, my knees were shaking, and I'm going, is this really happening? I was 18.
This is 18-year-old Jim Keeler, before the goddess of plastic models, we are not worthy.
Yeah, exactly. And she didn't say what I would be doing or anything else. And I said, well, of course, She says, great. Start in 2 weeks. Well, I was 18 and my birthday was on April the 7th. And on the 13th of April that year, 1961, I moved to Los Angeles to work for Revell. And I talked to Ed and I told him, I says, I'm scared to death. I've never had an apartment of my own. I don't know anything about it. And I don't know where to live or what, And I didn't. I lived with my family my whole life. And
typical
blah, blah, blah.
teenager of that era.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or this era for that matter.
Yeah. So anyway, by that time I had purchased a 1950 Chevy Bel Air hardtop, beautiful metallic green with a plaid green, black and white interior in it. Beautiful car, $150 at the time. And so I asked if I could borrow my father's car to move with. But anyway, getting back to the thing with Ed, I was so terrified. And he said, well, look, he says, just come and live with me. Oh. And I says, what do you mean live with me? He says, we'll come and live with our family. So for 6
really
weeks,
had established a friendship.
Yes. So for 6 weeks, I lived with Ed Roth and his family.
So you were not only immersed in model world, but in car world. I mean, this is California where you're talking about, that Venice area, and guys like Roth and people like that. This is like the Mecca of the hot rod world. This is where it was happening.
And by that time, I was doing car shows in Los Angeles and Long Beach and other areas, not just San Diego, and doing model shows to go with it. I put on the world's first, the United States anyway, first national model car contest, mail-in contest. Mm-hmm. And they were mailed to we had them at the sports arena with the Trident's car show there at the sports arena in 1960, I guess it was anyway. So anyway, I packed up all my model cars and all my stuff, and I left some of my more valuable models at the house where my dad lived, and I did not know it, but he was getting ready to marry again, and he did, and the woman he married threw everything out. So my Fisher body cars and blah, 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 So anyway, I moved to LA and started working at Revell, and I got to meet everybody there, and they took me around. And what they had me doing to start with was to be building product prototypes of kits of models they wanted to do as kits.
Okay.
And so they had done the Chrysler Corporation Slant 6 engine which eventually the real one ended up in my office, and that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to take that and turn it into a competition engine. Well, we happened to have 1/4 scale Chevrolet V8 parts that we had done aluminum tooling for. So I had these beautiful Chevy carburetors, 4-barrel carburetors, 2 of them, and I made an intake manifold for the Slant 6. And we anyway.
You made this, what, 1/4 scale Slant 6?
1/4 scale, yeah, Slant 6. And then I did some other stuff for them. And after about 6 weeks, I had a small office off of a hallway. I was not in the model shop, nor was I intended to be part of the model shop. And then in the R&D department, there were 2 guys working there. Shortly after they hired me, they fired the one guy, and left this other guy there who was a Scottish guy with a really bad temper, whose interest was primarily European automobiles and anything hot rod or hot rodded type or custom. He hated. So anyway, so after about 6 weeks, they called me to the personnel office and said, "We have a problem here." I said, "What's that?" And he says, "Well, we can't afford you." And they were paying me good money, but I was working hourly. He says, "You're coming in here at 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning, and you're not leaving until 2 or 3 in the morning." And he says, "We can't afford that." He says, "We're going to put you on a salary." And I thought they were going to fire me. So we'll put you on a salary. And I said, "That's great." So they gave me a slight increase, and I was now making what my father was making after a lifetime in the aircraft industry.
Wow.
I'd
always heard that Lou Glazer, or the Glazers, I should say, plural.
Yeah.
That they were always very generous to good employees. They knew how to hold on to good personnel.
Well, Revell was the only company I've ever worked for where there were absolutely no politics whatsoever.
Interesting.
Totally zero politics. It was a family.
That's great.
And everybody treated each other like brothers and sisters, and gave me a slight increase in pay, and so I stuck around. So eventually, I went to work one day, and my boss came in and he said, we had an administrative guy who ran the R&D department, and me and Jack Campbell, the other guy, were the R&D department at the time. So anyway, he took me in his office and he said, "Close the door." And I closed the door, and he says, "Well," "what are you doing today? What have you got scheduled?" And I says, "Well, I have this, and this." And by that time I was designing kits. And so he said, "Well, do you have any research you need to do outside the factory? Car museums or drag races?" Or I said, "It's the middle of the week." I said, "None of that stuff's going on." And then finally I was getting adrift here, and I said, "So could you tell me exactly what's going on here?" He says, "Well, we're going to fire Jack Campbell today, and we don't think you should be here."
So that's the Scottish guy?
Yeah. So I left immediately.
I'll be at the museum.
He says, "Go have a good lunch." So I went and had a premiered lunch on the company and blah, 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 and then came back the next day, and Jack was gone, and I was the R&D department.
Now you say that you were the R&D department. That was for cars. I mean, they had a separate R&D department for other types of models, or
at the time they had decided to do cars.
Okay.
And so they weren't doing any other kits. They were doing they were starting to work on the space kits at that time. And that was all pretty much had been done, and they were going into tooling and stuff. So I didn't have anything to do with that. So I have here at home right now a memo from Lou Glazer that was written in 1960 or so, that Lou had written to all the members, the top people in the company, stating basically that we need to get into model car kits.
Yeah. Because Revell sort of had a reputation as the model airplane company up until then.
Model airplane,
Monogram was cars, and Aurora was Aurora.
Yeah, Aurora was Aurora. Yeah. So it was quite interesting. They came to me one day and he said, "We'd like to do 3 model car kits. Would you write up and make a presentation to management?" Well, I'm like 19 years old and 2 months, I'd never done a presentation to anyone. And I didn't know what I was doing.
Kind of drinking from the fire hose.
I was drinking from the fire hose with 3 fire hoses. And so I said, okay.
Do you remember what the 3 cars were?
Oh, absolutely. And I wanted to do a 56 Ford pickup, number one, because it was the most famous pickup in the world at the time and still is today, as a matter of fact.
Is that the 148 scale one or the?
They had a 48 scale one at the time, but I wanted it 25th scale because I wanted to build one. So I said, 56 Ford pickup. And then I said, Mickey Thompson Challenger, because I knew Mickey Thompson. I'd met him at the shows as well. And I wanted to do a land speed record car since I was a Bonneville land speed record car freak also. Mm-hmm. And then I said, and we need to do Ed Roth's Outlaw. Well, who's Ed Roth? So I put a whole presentation. Yeah, well, they didn't know.
I understand. So, 2 different worlds.
And they never questioned it. They never questioned it at all. They said,
I'm assuming they understood that you knew the car scene better than they did. This was new to them, but for a 19-year-old, this was old hat for you.
Oh, absolutely. And so I put all this stuff together, and I went into this meeting, and we sat down, and we had a discussion about. The first one I brought up was the 56 Ford pickup truck, and they just said, "We're doing that. Let's just go on. That's done." And then I got to the Mickey Thompson's Challenger, and then halfway through my little presentation, I was interrupted by one of the vice presidents, and he said, No. He says, I want to hear about this Ed Roth guy. We'll do the Challenger. Okay, we'll do the Challenger. Okay, great. So no questions. I mean, there was no back checking on any of this stuff or anything on their part. And so
you just took it your word.
They took my word. And so then I showed them all these pictures of Ed Roth's car. And I was studied photography in high school. And of course, we're doing stuff for the magazines by this time now. So and I'd had photographs published in newspapers all across the country of new car announcements starting when I was in high school, because I'd sneak into the places and photograph the new cars, blah, blah, blah. So I sold those to the newspapers. So I had all these pictures of Ed and the shows and everything else. So after about an hour, they decided this is what we were going to do. And now I had to design the kits. Mm-hmm. Well, I had learned how to do all this stuff when I was doing Fisher Body Craftsman's Guild. I'd taken drafting classes. I knew a little bit about engineering. I had studied draft angles and stuff on the model kits that I built, because I looked at them and I thought, how did they make this stuff in a mold, because you couldn't do that. And anyway, everything just fell together. And so I was officially now doing exploder view drawings and doing complete parts list of every car. And then, of course, I had to do research and provide photographs, drawings, any outside information I could get on all the parts. Like I talked to Scintilla, and they sent me a real magneto so we could have it to use for the Challenger.
Impressive.
It was, and Cal Custom in California, they provided us with all kinds of stuff. So anyway, I knew how to do research. It just happened that it all came together at Revell.
And you were there about 5 years, right?
Yeah, I was there about 5 years, and I left because they got into slot racing, and I really wasn't that fond of slot racing, although I helped to do the cars and the stuff for the slot racing sets. Mm-hmm. And was involved in that. One of the more notable projects, just to show you the attention to detail that Revell had. Okay, there's this little story. My boss comes into me one day and he says, we need information on hay bales. We're doing the racetrack and we're going to put hay bales around it. He says, mm-hmm. So today is your day to go out and find out everything you can about hay bales. So I found all the farm stores in LA, and they were scattered all over the outside of the city. And I went out and I looked at hay bales, and there were two wire bales and 3 wire bales and blah, 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 different sizes. And so that's the kind of detail they wanted. They wanted to have hay bales to look correct. And so we did. Uh-huh. We did them right. But eventually the slot racing thing started to get to me. And then they got a new guy in the R&D department to be the administrative guy. And he and I just didn't get along. And at that time, I had also met a gal from Southern California who was living in Utah, going to school in Southern Utah, not far from where I live now. And I had been taking my vacations up in Southern Utah. Okay. And the Grand Canyon, blah, blah, blah. And I met her in a small town there. And we were going to get married and move back to Utah and go to school. And so I was having a difficulty with this guy one day, and I finally just said, I'm done. And I walked out the door.
But you always remained active in building cars, though.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No, I was still building model cars, and I was still writing for the publications all the way through college.
Because you didn't have to be physically present to write for them.
No. I did all my stuff. I drive to LA and go to the drag races and
had you already won the national championship with Dodge Fever at this point, or was that come later?
No, that was in 1968.
Okay,
when that happened. Okay. 68, 69. Is that right? No, 68.
I went out and saw some pictures of it after we talked last, and it almost looks like a hand cut kit. I mean, it's hard to believe that was a modification. I was like, wow, that looks like it was made that way. I was like, you cut a regular car down into that?
Yeah, that's what I did. I just I was broke going to school at the time, and I saw the magazine in the store, and I thought it said to build to make a funny car out of a Dodge Charger. So I bought a Charger kit, and instead of the magazine, went home and started to build it. And then I went back and bought the magazine. I got paid from somewhere, and I read it, and it was a Dodge Challenger, so I had to start over again. So,
did you ever finish the Charger?
So anyway, I later on, when I did the magazine article on how to build them, I did the Charger, and I used that body in that. So
okay, so it didn't go to waste.
It didn't go to waste. No, it was in the background there, and of course I was still buying and collecting cars, and because I was writing for the magazines, the companies were all sending me kits. I had tons of kits to work with, and plus my whole collection that I had been buying over the years. But so anyway, I left Revell and I came up to Utah. I studied photography and writing here at the school, and after the first 2 semesters or so, we ran out of money, and Boeing was hiring up in Seattle, and so they were sending people down through the small towns in Utah to recruit people to build airplanes. Mm-hmm. And I heard about it, but I didn't. But then a month later, I told my wife, I said, we never took a honeymoon. I've turned my little Volkswagen into a camper that I had designed, and we took off and took a 6-week trip to Seattle as our honeymoon, and camped out and had the whole great time. And then we got to Seattle, and within 3 days, we both had jobs at Boeing. And when I talked to the guy at Boeing, he saw my resume with the model thing on there. And he said, are you interested in model building? And I says, well, yes, I am. And he says, well, we have a model building class. And when you pass, you then go to work in the model shop building the wind tunnel models. Oh, this is fantastic. So yeah, I want to do this. So I got into the class. 6 weeks later, I was head of the class, and I learned to work with stainless steel, to weld it and machine it and everything else. And then at the end of the class, he called me in the office and he said, you're doing pretty well with this stuff. He says, normally it's 1.5 years in the model shop before you can work in the wind tunnel. He says, we're going to put you directly into the wind tunnel as a professional model maker. And I'm going, yippee. So I was in the transonic wind tunnel there at Boeing for that year, and had a blast, worked on the 747, 737, SST until it was canceled. And then eventually, and I was still writing for the magazines. And eventually we quit there and came back to school in Utah, and I went to Utah State University to again study photography. And I wanted to go to Art Center school in LA. And while I was at Revell put me through classes at Art Center and paid for it. So I got some of that behind me. But I found out a school in Utah had 2 professors there that had both studied at Art Center.
I remember from part of it, I just want to ask you about Art Center real quick. I believe that is where Tom Daniel went, and I remember talking about it. Yeah, and he was, when I heard it, that's like a 10-hour a day, 6-day a week school. I mean, people think, oh, it's art school, but
it wasn't
actually
just 10
very
hours.
demanding.
it was more like a 12 to 13 hour day.
I've heard that it was just constant,
it was absolute constant. Yeah, right. And I just
drawing over and over and over again till you could. And
yeah, no, I took evening classes, and the classes were 3 hours long. And then I'd go home and do homework every night. At the classes were twice a week. I did homework every night till 2 or 3 in the morning.
Did you ever cross paths with Jack Linwood?
Yes, I worked with Jack Linwood at Revell. I was the liaison with him to provide him all the research material to do the paintings.
Oh, that's I would have liked to have met him, because
he was.
This is my favorite box art ever, which is one of his. You know, I've always thought it's the most beautiful. But I did a bio on him. But you've been rubbing elbows with all the big names in the industry. I mean, the Glazers, Linwood, Tom Daniel, and all the other people you've mentioned.
Yeah, for years. Yeah.
And you were a teenager when you started doing. That's the really amazing part.
Well, that's the thing that blew me away. Is, I mean, I got to Revell and I look back on it now and I'm saying, where the hell did they get the confidence to hire some, at the time, 18-year-old kid, and to have him come in and run the whole model car program?
Yeah, they had an eye for talent.
And that's exactly what I did. And it was amazing working with all the people there, the engineers, the model makers.
But you didn't work again in the kit model industry until Aurora. I mean, you did other things.
Yeah, well, I continued writing for the magazines, and so I was doing stuff with monogram kits and AMT and blah blah blah. And then 1968, I was at this. Well, this is a funny story. My wife was pregnant with what was going to be our second child.
Okay.
And so,
where are you living at this time?
In Logan, Utah, going to Utah State.
Okay.
And I had 7 months until I graduated. This was in November. And I went to she woke me up in the middle of the night, and she wanted a bottle of kimchi. That was her go-to pregnancy food. Mm-hmm. So I said, sure, I'll go get you some kimchi.
Shredded Korean cabbage that's been aged in the ground is always what makes you feel better when you're pregnant.
Exactly. So I went and went to the store, bought it, and then on the way out, I stopped by the model aisle, which every store had a model aisle then.
I have to tell some of the viewers of my channel, understand that, yes, grocery stores, gas stations, a lot of places had models tucked away somewhere with the toys and sundries.
Yeah, they were everywhere. Anyway, and there were 3 or 4 new kits from Aurora on the shelf there. And I looked at those kits and I thought, what in the hell are these people doing?
Do you remember what they were?
Yeah, there was the Worst and Peppermint Fuzz.
Oh, I remember that one.
Yeah, okay. Then it was there were 4 in that group. And they had been designed by Andy Anches, which I did not know at the time. So
who sadly just passed away
just passed away
recently.
Yeah. So anyway,
you got to know Andy at some point, didn't you?
Oh yeah. Well, he worked for me at Aurora. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Oh yeah. We worked together. So anyway, I took the kimchi home, and then I thought, what the hell? I'm in the morning. I'm going to call these people at Aurora and just tell them what I think of their latest stuff. So
now, this is when Diker was taking over, right?
And I did not know that the company had been sold to Diker.
Okay.
I did not know that. I did not know that they were hiring all these new people, and not even his secretary knew who everybody was. But
which worked to your advantage in this case.
Yeah, it was a big advantage. So what I did was I made several phone calls, one to find out who his secretary was, one to find out who the president of the company was. And his name was Charles Diker. And I figured, well, they called him Chuck. And then I finally got the direct phone number for his secretary. So I called her directly without going through the factory operators who I had been working with on the 3 or 4 phone calls I made to research this conversation. So I called her, and she answered the phone, and I said, I was wondering if I could speak to Chuck. I didn't know who they called him. And she says, just a moment, who's calling? And I said, Jim Keeler. And she says, I'll put him right on. He came on the phone, and I said, hi, my name is Jim Keeler. I'm a model builder, and I just saw some of your new kits at the store, and I think they're shit. And pardon everybody on the internet if I use the word shit, but that's what I thought of those kits. So anyway, 20-minute conversation ensued, and before the end of the conversation, I mean, there was a 20-second total blank after I said that word. And then he said, "Who is this? Who's calling?" I told him again, "Well, who are you?" And I told him, and he says, 20 minutes later, he says, "Can you be in New York on Thursday?" This was Monday. So I had to cut off my long hair. I mean, long hair. My mustache.
It was the 60s, baby.
it was I cut off all my hair, had to buy a suit and a tie and a white shirt because I didn't even own one, a pair of dress shoes because I wore boots, I'm going to school. Who needs all that stuff? So anyway, and then there was a travel agency in town that would provide tickets for people going on job interviews. And I didn't tell them I wasn't going for a job interview. I didn't know what I was going there for. I had no idea what.
Well, you kind of were. You just didn't know it.
I didn't. I really didn't know. I had no idea. I thought he just wanted to have me tell him more about the stupid kits they were making. So anyway, and I knew that, Joe Giammarino and all those guys were now gone and all the old people were no longer there, blah, blah, blah. So I flew back there and arrived there. I flew in on a Wednesday night, was there Thursday morning. And first hour I was there, I met with Diker and a couple of the other VPs in their offices. And then they took me over to the R&D department. And the first thing they showed me was a new model motoring chassis at the time. And I always thought model motoring was a dumb name for that stuff because kids like to race cars. They didn't want to motor around their yard. Okay. So I didn't like the name model motoring from day one when it first came out or anything, but I knew what it was and everything else. So they would showed me this new chassis. And from my experience at Revell, I said, do this, 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 and this, which they did. And one of the major ones was snap-on bodies. So instead of screw-on bodies. So I immediately saved the company a lot of money. Then they had a bunch of movie monster kits they were doing. And I said, well, why don't we put these all on bases so they interlock and you can make a big scene out of them. And so now they became monster scenes. And that's where that all started. And there were a few other things they showed me and we talked about. And by the end of the day, I went back to the motel that night. And next morning I came in and they gave me a check for $5,000. Said, we'll pay you $500 a month to finish school. This was $1969. I was
going to say that was a princely sum.
That was a lot of money.
Basically a consulting fee. Now,
yeah, it was.
Did you were talking about the model motoring? Is this what led on to the garage scenes, or was that completely
no? So what happened was that I, for the next 7 months, as I finished school, I would go to school for about 2.5 weeks, and then I would take 3-4 days off, fly to New York, and work on projects there to get things going. And then in June, I moved back to New York, took the family there, and moved into a $1 million house on an island north of Long Island in Lloyd Harbor, it's called. And so I was doing well. So anyway, we were doing a lot of stuff there, and the people who had been in charge of everything before all left. So the whole R&D department, there was a total turnover of everybody.
About what year was
and
this?
So that left me. This would have been between 1969 and 1970.
Okay.
In the fall and January, February, March, April.
Because I understand this is about the time that Aurora started sliding downhill.
With Diker's stuff, the first thing Diker said when he arrived was, "We're not going to do model kits anymore. We're going to make this into a toy and game company." And he says the emphasis is on games.
Now, if correct
me,
they
if I'm
had
wrong, been very successful with their.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but at this point, when he decides to make this shift, Aurora is the third largest plastic kit model maker, either in the world or in the country. In the world. And yes, they were doing killer business with their figures and stuff. I know Abe Shikes wasn't too thrilled about them, but they were making bank with those. Raced with the slot cars that clobbered them hard.
Well, they had shortly after I arrived there in June, and by the middle of July, 6 weeks later, I had been originally hired to be product manager of hobby kits. And now I was asked to be product manager of model motoring.
Okay.
And I said, great. So then that began my involvement in the slot racing thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing I wanted to do was to get rid of that snap lock track and, with the pins and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and do snap track. So that was
we actually had an Aurora.
My
older brother had an Aurora track with the
yeah. So, and then the cars, when I arrived there, they were planning on calling the cars the Scorchers, and they were going to do cars look like the Hot Wheels cars.
Mm-hmm.
And they were going to be thingies. Well, they had already started tooling on 2 of these thingies, and I said no more. They're all going to be real cars. And so the next 8 cars we did, and I selected all the cars, did all the research. I flew out to Art Center in LA, and I hired the best man that I could find there to come back to New York and do all my drawings and designs. And then I went back out a few months later and hired a second guy too. So we were doing the best stuff there was. And we had pattern makers to do all the patterns out of acetate. And my emphasis was on producing as many cars as you could, because I had flown around the country after I started working at Aurora, interviewing kids in cities all over the US at hobby shops on Saturdays, and found out, I talked to so many kids that had over 100 cars. And I thought, we got to make a lot of cars, and every car has to have a lot of different colors for the collectors. And 60 years later, that's still what's going on. AFX is still going strong. So the name time came, and we had a big meeting, and I was not invited, but they said, today we're going to decide on Scorchers or AFX. And I was scared to death of the Scorchers name. I thought it was terrible. We needed to have racing, and the AFX name came from A Factory Experimental Drag Racing Cars. Okay. And I adapted it as Aurora Factory Experimentals. And so that's how that got going. And at the end of the meeting, it was AFX. It still is. Yeah. Still is today. So anyway, I spent 5 years at Aurora. And my very first trip there, I had made up some sample boxes of possible kits, and I had done the illustrations and the box art and everything, and made 3D models in that 4 days 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, before I flew back there. So I made all those presentations to them. I still have the original presentation papers that I gave to them when I flew back there. So when I arrived there, then Andy was the project manager of Hobby Kits, and Andy and I got along amazing. He was such an amazing person, very quirky, very outspoken, but he knew what the hell he was talking about. He really knew the business. He probably, when he died, the whole history of the hobby kit industry went in the grave with him.
I actually told people that on my thing that we lost a national resource.
Oh, absolutely. No, he was the best. And there are others that know a lot about the hobby industry, but Andy's knowledge was encyclopedic. And I really miss him. I'm
sorry. Well, I'll cut this part out. Because this is private.
No, it's not private. No, I don't want it to be private.
Okay.
I really miss it.
I'll be happy to share it. I just don't want you to be uncomfortable.
No, Andy was amazing. And we were friends up until he died. We had constant communications. We worked on 2 books together.
I've got them. That's where I read about you, and we're going to talk about this next, I guess, because you know where I'm going next. And I was like, hey, wait a minute. I remember Andy talking about this. Oh, that's Jim Keeler. And that's the first time I actually saw a picture of you. And,
okay.
So let's go to the HIMS show. Was it 71?
Yep.
Okay. Take it away, boss.
Well, we had done these incredible series of kits. The research on them was amazing. Andy and I worked on them, continuously. Management kept their fingers out of our pie. We did our thing. And, one of the models was Vampirella. There was nothing in that series of kits that the company hadn't already done, like guillotines and so forth and so on. Well, we designed all those models so that they would come apart, and you could interchange a different set of legs with the body.
So you guys sitting or standing or
moving different directions, walking, whatever, moving, holding things with the arms, another set of arms holding things, another one doing something else, so they had all of these parts with them and they all snapped together. So they had hired a woman her name was Shirley Henschel. I don't know where they got her from. And I did not know at the time that she was in charge of putting the display together for the hobby show. And so my job, part of my job when I got to Chicago, which is where the hobby show was held every year, was to put together the entire showroom for the hobby show there. And we built it all in New York and shipped it all out. And I supervised the assembly and so forth. But this time, it wasn't me, it was Shirley Henschel. So Andy and I got up early in the morning, went downstairs, walked in, and here's all of these scantily clad 6'5" models with all of their body parts hanging out in the hobby show, which is
this would have been more apt for a car show or
more like a X-rated show in Vegas at the time.
Okay.
No, I'm serious. Yeah, their costumes they were outrageous, totally outrageous. And here they were demonstrating to customers who had walked in how you could cut the bodies apart with the guillotine and the legs would fly off, and you could chop their heads off, and you could cut their arms off, and this was the whole thing. It was unbelievable. I mean,
I might have it right here, but I seem to remember Andy had a rather colorful description of your reaction when you saw this.
Yeah, there was a very colorful description of my reaction when I saw this. I just about
have to buy his book to see it, to read about it.
I just about walked in there and threw them all out. And I was in a position in the company that I probably could have succeeded in doing that. I would have lost my job. But then Andy and I would have been the one talking about the models.
Mm-hmm.
And there would not have been the big brouhaha that ensued.
And you think this was the triggering moment that, because most likely people watching this channel are already familiar with what happened to Aurora with the monster scenes and everything. After that, the outraged mothers, even the TV show Laugh-In gave Aurora the Fickle Finger Award?
We got the Fickle Finger of Fate Award. Yes.
I mean, who was it? Diker was on the phone to Nabisco or something. He says, "We've got people marching outside. What should I do? Pray for rain."
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
I mean, but you can't buy that kind of publicity.
No, but it was just, I mean, all the work and energy we'd put into this. And the hobby market was ready for these kits.
And then it got snuffed out because of one person's
idiocy.
Yeah. And you guys had to send all the kits to Canada, right?
Yeah, we shipped everything to Canada. Yeah.
I'll let you in on something. I remember being at the local 5 and Dime in my podunk little town and seeing some of these kits. And I was a model airplane guy, or World War II mostly. So they weren't really for me. But my best friend bought every monster kit Aurora made. He has his room looked like a shrine to it, and which is really fun when you're 10 years old trying to go to sleep with a glow in the dark Godzilla staring down at you, But anyway,
absolutely,
But I remember
a great market. Yeah.
But what I remember though is that one week they were there, and I didn't realize this was been right about that time. Because I go in there on Saturday. One Saturday I go in there, I'm like, another Saturday I go in there, another Saturday I go in, not a one of them. And I was thinking, somebody must have bought them all.
Mom threw them out. Yep.
Oh, well. So what are you doing these days? You still in the model? Was Aurora the end of your model industry, or you, or that you can talk about? I don't want to get into any active stuff that you're.
When I left Aurora, I was Monogram wanted to hire me.
It was about 75.
Yeah, and so I didn't want to live in Chicago. So I didn't accept her. I decided to go back to Los Angeles and apply at Mattel or one of the other companies and stay in the toy business. So my wife and I loaded up, and by that time we had 3 little kids, and the moving van and the dogs and everything. And we arrived in Salt Lake, and my mother lived there, and I had been born there. And of course, I'd been living in southern Utah too. So we arrived there, and my wife said to me, and I said to her at the same time, "Why do we want to go back to LA?" Yeah. So we decided to stay in Salt Lake City. And so I immediately got into a retail store, toy and hobby store there, for about 8 months. And then there was a wholesale toy and hobby company there. And at the hobby store, the owner of the store that I was managing, they didn't want to give me my insurance that they said they would give me for my family and stuff. And I needed the insurance with the kids. And Western Toy and Hobby, the wholesale place, I went to there. The first when I went in there, they said, "Well, you're hired, and your quota for the year here is going to be $90,000." That was like in March or so. And I figured, well, I can't sell $90,000 worth of stuff, Well, I found out that there wasn't a salesman there at the time who had sold over 225,000 in a year. By my 3rd year, it was my first $1 million year.
I have a feeling that but you were coming from a position of experience far beyond what I imagine most of these guys had.
Yeah, these guys had no idea. They had no idea. So I took the business, and my last 4 years there, I was doing the last year I did 1.3 million. And then at that particular year, my first wife decided she wanted a divorce. And so the divorce interfered with my job. I lost my job. And it took me 2 years to get my life back together again. I met Sandra, and we got married. She had 2 kids, and then we had 2 more boys between us. And between the 2 of us, we had 10 kids. 5 from my first marriage, and then her 3, one of whom died, and then the 2 new ones. So we really enjoyed things together, and I was still going out to Bonneville Salt Flats, going to the races. I was still involved in everything, but I was hired by Minicraft to design a couple of kits for them.
Which ones?
I did the 16th scale hot rods and stuff with their existing kits.
New end. Huh? Oh, go ahead.
So, and then about 5 years ago, I was contacted by a representative of a Chinese company called Structo, and they wanted to do some 1/8 scale die-cast model cars. And it was going to be a series of the top 5 or 10 American and custom cars. And between us, we eventually I wanted to do Ross Outlaw, but we ended up doing the Dean Jeffries Manta Ray. And so I did all the research on it. I went down there and spent 3-4 days at his shop. And of course, I'd known him from before, years and years before. So
tell me about
put all the information together, and I worked on the computer.
Tell me about Dean, because
What's that?
You hear about people like Dick Dean and Dean Jeffries, and you see pictures of the cars, but you never hear anything about them as people. Tell me a little bit about Dean Jeffries.
Dean Jeffries was an absolutely amazing person. He had an extremely limited vocabulary, and most of which was 4-letter words. Oh, I'm serious.
I understand he was a real magician with sheet metal.
He was. Well, he built the Manta Ray, and when I was working at Revell, on my way driving to Peterson to do my work there, I'd pass his office at least once or twice a month. And I watched him build the car over several months. And he started with a wire frame, and then he took the wire frame down to a shop in LA that made all the IndyCar bodies. I can't remember their name, all out of aluminum on English wheels. And I became fascinated with the English wheel while I was watching them do that stuff. And the body was made out of 88 separate pieces of aluminum. And he had never welded aluminum before. and he welded all 88 pieces together. So it was a one-piece body.
Wow.
And I have been inside the car, and from inside the car, you can hardly tell that there were welds. The outside, of course, they were all ground smooth and polished, but he was a fascinating man. He even had a sample of the original pearlescent paint that they painted the car with. So we copied it in China. So anyway, I worked with the Chinese engineers on my computer with the software between it, and we put the whole thing together. And then they would start making parts, and they'd send me pictures of them, and I'd look at them and say, that's not going to work. It's going to be this way. Well, they'd do another set, and it still didn't work. And then a third or fourth set, by the time they got through, and I'm dead serious, you cannot tell the pictures of the car apart from the model. It is so perfectly done, 8th scale. And Diecast Magazine has called it the best die-cast model car ever made.
I seem to recall seeing, I think when we first had our first phone call sometime back, you might have mentioned it, because I seem to remember going out and looking at it as soon as, and I was like, wow, that genuinely, I'll probably, when I do this in post, I'll probably have a picture up here on the screen for people to see what we're talking about.
That's a good idea, because it was an amazing model. And I should have gotten one out of the deal. They were going to make a limited edition. We made it. We manufactured 175. We have the tooling for all of it, and it's in a warehouse in China, and they won't let me access any of it to sell. I could sell the hell out of the 289 engine, and the tires and wheels. I mean, unbelievable. But
did they just want to manufacture rarity?
They wanted to manufacture very exclusive rarity, and it's $2,500 a pop.
Yeah,
and they sold all of them. So I don't have one. Yeah. I'm still trying to acquire one. I have I have signals out, and I should be able to get one hopefully by the end of the year if this whole COVID thing will collapse a little bit. So I'm still waiting to get one of those. But and then most recently this spring, I was contacted by Atlantis Models out of New York, and I had met the people at Atlantis 3-4 years ago at the National Hobby Show. And spent 3 or 4 days with them talking about kits and stuff. And then they called me back. We talked several times, and then they called me back in the spring and wanted to hire me up as a consultant. And I said, fine, no problem at all. And so, but I said, I'm located in Hurricane, Utah. So kind of out of the way place, but I'm still looking at magazines and cars and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, they eventually gave me another phone call and said, we've got all of this tooling from that you did 60 years ago, the Revell custom car parts, and we sold millions of them then. Okay, and we would like you to take those and make a whole bunch of car kits out of them, and we want to call them Keeler's Customs.
Perfect.
So so the old big argument I had was, am I going to spell customs with a C or a K? Because you got to do it
like was it AMC?
I hated George Barris Customs.
Well, who was it? The cat.
I hated that K.
Who was it? AMT or MPC? They had the guy, the cat.
The cat from AMT.
Yeah, AMT. Well, he did it with the cool cat with the K. So yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I decided to we'll do Keeler's Customs.
If you want to avoid trouble, have them do like Toys R Us, turn the second K backwards.
Yeah. Well, we're not going to do that one. But no, I'll tell you another funny story too. That 4 months before Revell hired me, it was January of '61. I drove up from San Diego to the Pomona drag races. And they had a big custom car show. George Barris was there, and the president of AMT was there. And so I won the contest I won best in show for the model contest. So he was talking to me outside the show for about 20 minutes, and I didn't catch his drift at all, not at all. I was anxious to leave him standing there so I could go over and watch the cars run. So I didn't pay a lot of attention to what he was saying. Well, 2 months later, I'm at another car show in Southern California, and George Barris comes up to me. He says, Keeler, he says, you really screwed up. And I says, what are you talking about? He says, you were talking to George Toda there 2 months ago.
Oh my gosh. George Toda, man. He
president of AMT. And he said he was trying to hire you.
Wow. Okay, I got to ask you a question. I did a thing on Totiff when I did talked about him a lot when I did the AMT, because to me George Totiff is one of the most influential people in kit model history because of his side pillar,
absolutely,
yeah, and and he went back to the very beginning, and he pulled Lindbergh out of the fire when he took over there, and the later Lindbergh kits, Lindbergh never had the greatest reputation, but the later ones, I built one of them recently. I mean, they were really good kits.
They were beautiful kits,
and
George's influence.
I was just the more I learned about the guy, he was a very impressive individual. So you really have knocked elbows with all the luminaries of our big hobby. So
pretty much the people at Monogram I became friends with, Roger Harney, counterpart at Monogram.
Yep.
He and I became very, very good friends the last few years of his life. And when they were getting ready to do a new model, he'd call me up and he'd say, we're thinking about doing this, or this. What do you want to do? And I said, I'd do this. And that's what they did. So that influence.
Did you ever get to know Reeder or Besser?
I met both of them. Yeah. At different times. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And they were very quiet people.
I heard they were very quiet, grounded, very sensible.
Yes.
And
very, extremely so. And
Tom Daniels,
but I just didn't want to live in Chicago.
I can understand that. I've been through Chicago
Tom
winter.
does. Well, I can understand that you did 95 kits with them.
Yeah. When I did the history of Monogram for my channel, and of course, pretty much most of it came out of Phil Graham's books. But I was very annoyed at the way Besser got treated, by Mattel when they basically just came in and threw him out of his own company in a day.
Well, Mattel came in and they decided that they were going to make toys that you could build by yourself. Yeah. And so they did the illuminators and they did all this crazy crap. And in fact, when I was at Aurora, we would buy our competition's model kits to analyze. So we had a competition analysis of every kit of everybody brought out. So I was going through their tanks one day and I noticed the inside the tank that what had been the original model date on it had been welded up and ground off, and there was a new date on it. Well, the reason they were ground off is because I found out later is because when Mattel came in, no tanks, no military models were going to do this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so they shut it down. And then after Mattel got their fingers out of the pie, they brought the kit out again and put another date on it.
Yeah.
But Tom just lives 60 miles from me.
Yep, that's right. As I was going to ask you, how's it all you old model guys are ending up in Utah?
Great place to live. Incredible place.
I have been there. It is beautiful. I usually change planes in Salt Lake when I go in to visit my brother up in Helena.
Yeah. Well, if you're ever out this way and you want to come up from Vegas or down from Salt Lake or something, we have a little airport here in St. George, and there are flights that come in. And it'd be fun to have you come out and we could go to Zion National Park.
Oh,
it's just 30 minutes from the house. Yeah. Sweet. Yeah. So,
well, I'm going to stop recording, and this is where I'll do my sign off with everybody, post production.
Right.
So let me find the button so I can stop recording.
Okay.
Hey guys, this has been with Jim Keeler. Stay on. I'm going to talk to you, and want to thank him for this wonderful Zoom session, all that great information, and hopefully we'll get to do this again sometime.